Welcome to the Power of Partnership podcast. I'm Riane Eisler, President of the Center for Partnership Systems. This podcast brings you voices from the partnership movement, people using partnership practices to build a world that values caring, nature, and shared prosperity. The Power of Partnership podcast is hosted by Cherri Jacobs Pruitt, a health policy and partnership scholar. Today, Cherri interviews Sara Saltee, Director of my Center for Partnership Systems Education Program and founder of the Saltee Academy for Complex Creativity. And now on to the POP podcast, showing how we can reimagine creativity for a partnership world.
Welcome, Sara, to the Power of Partnership podcast series. We're so glad that you're able to join us today.
Thanks for having me.
Let's begin by you sharing with our listeners, what is a creativity coach?
Okay. Well, I studied to be a creativity coach in the early 2000s with a man named Eric Maisel, who was sort of the father of this whole idea of creativity coaching. What my training with him taught me was to really help people know themselves as creators, to deepen their understanding of the creative process so that they can be more joyful and more free in not only in creating their body of work, so their art, but also in creating their lives. And so I do a lot to try to understand the kinds of things that block creativity or that interfere with our ability to sort of have our creativity flow. And because my own background is not in psychotherapy, but is in social science and sort of social and cultural studies, that has informed my work in the sense that when I'm thinking about creative blocks, I'm not just thinking about the blocks in our psychology, but the way in which our culture itself and the dynamics of our culture can block our access to our creativity.
And so can you speak about how patterns of domination versus partnership show up when we think about creativity?
Yes, I mean, it's been such a gift to be working with the Center for Partnership Systems over these last decade, while I simultaneously have been doing so much of my developing my thinking and writing around creativity. So for me, these things are very intertwined. We know that domination systems are inherently anti-creative, and this is for a lot of reasons. So their domination systems operate as hierarchies of control. And of course, creativity is this force that is inherently wild. It is inherently uncontrollable by external forces. It's immanent. It's a form of immanent power that exists within each of us and is really not amenable completely ever to external control. And we see, I think, in the culture wars that we're witnessing in the United States today, in this impulse to silence diverse voices, right? To silence the creativity of authors of color, of LGBTQ authors, to ban books, to shut down libraries, to restrict what teachers can teach. All of that is a way, of course, of sort of controlling the narrative, right? Having control of a singular story that we all agree. And as we move toward the partnership end of the spectrum, what starts to happen, I think, in partnership cultures is that there's this recognition that truth exists in multiple there's multiple truths to be told, and that our perspectives and our identities shape the way we see the world, and that our job isn't to pick the one and enforce it on everybody else, but is to try to deepen our understanding of one another's perspectives, to be respectful of those ways in which our position in the world shapes what we're able to see and not see. And so I think the other way that I know Riane and many others have talked about creativity in terms of domination systems has to do with gender and the way in which domination systems inherently have that hierarchy of the masculine is superior, feminine's inferior. And this has translated over time into our thinking about creativity, in the sense that the creativity of men has historically been valued over the creativity of women. And so we have, male chefs, and women have been home cooks, right? Men have been fine artists, women are crafters. And sort of access to the training and to the trajectories that help people to cultivate their creativity have been limited for women and for people of color. The one other thing I wanted to say around domination systems and creativity is, one of the things that happens in domination systems is the suppression of creativity through play. In our culture, we see this in the erosion of, arts programs, music programs, in our schools, but also just the erosion of time that's allocated for children to play, and that translates across the lifespan. And that as we lose our access to play, what's fascinating, the studies have been done that play deprivation leads to antisocial behavior. It erodes our ability to think flexibly and imaginatively and create solutions to complex problems. In play, we learn to see past how things are and to see what they could be, right? To invent new worlds, to invent the future. We get comfortable with the sort of malleability of reality, the multiplicity of reality. And we, I think, do our culture, such a disservice when we don't stand up for the value of play in terms of how that sets the stage for that polycultural, healthy cultural ecosystem that we would want to live in, that represents a sort of partnership vision of the world. And I think the way in which domination systems, the reason that we've shut play down isn't in a sort of overt desire for sort of control in a traditional domination system sense, but it has more to do with the way in which our particular American culture has embraced the ethos of productivity as its sort of dominant ethos. If that's the value system, this ethos of productivity that we've been living with, and I've learned from Riane Eisler that the idea of a caring economy says we're not valuing the work of care as we should, right? We're not valuing the time and the energy and the exchange and the relationship development and the nurturing and all of that's in the realm of the ethos of care. The whole point of the caring economy work is to say, hey, all this work that's going on here to care for people and the care for nature is also productive work, right? So we should value it. We should stand up for it. And so I thought to myself, well, we need to do the same thing for creativity, because just as productivity drove out sort of as sort of the rise of productivity as our dominant value system, the care, the world of care was sort of shoved to the side, and we shrunk our it's the world of women, and it's not productive labor, it's reproductive labor, so we don't have to think about it in terms of economic value, and it just happens out of the goodness of people's hearts. So good, that's taken care of. Well, where is creativity in that picture? I think, we come from this history of productivity is this masculine world, care is this distinctly feminine world. Creativity is in this really queer kind of in between non-gendered space, right? It's not traditional women's work, but it's also not traditional men's work, right? It's this place where boundaries and categories and binaries and all of that are fluid and open for malleable and open for exploration. So one of the things I started to think is, okay, so if we were going to assert that creativity is itself an ethos, creativity is a value system, it is a distinctly third thing. So I've started to explore, what is the ethos of creativity? And it's a really fascinating question. What are the values that writers, artists, creators share? And what does that have to teach us in our world? And I think at the core of that is this distinction between the productive self, the productivity self. We are trained with this attitude of, I impose my will upon a world of things, right? I make things happen. I, do the thing. I get my stuff done. The creative self, and this is part of the ethos of creativity, says, I interact within a dynamic, living world, right? I am not surrounded by things and objects. I do not turn the natural world into a resource or an exploitable, I don't see a tree as a thing to be chopped down and turned into profit. I see a tree as a living being with whom I can have a relationship. And if I'm a painter, I can deepen that relationship by trying to capture the spirit or the essence of that tree, in my painting. Or if I'm a writer, I can write my poem about so we have this, I think the creative ethos is this idea of interactivity, of interplay, that everything is reciprocal, two-way, mutual. And it's very much the way Riane Eisler describes the sort of spirit of partnership systems, right? Is that relationality, the relationships of mutual respect and mutual benefit. And so there's this way of being in the world that says, my work is as a creator, is to heal and evolve myself through my caring and curious relationships with the world. And by so doing, I will also heal and evolve the culture, right? I'll create a culture worth living in, or at least be part of that.
You are listening to the Power of Partnership podcast. If you would like us to share your partnership story, or if you would like to become a proud sponsor of the POP podcast, please contact us at center@partnershipway.org. And now, back to today's episode. So, as a creativity coach, where do we go from here? How do we reimagine our own creativity to really help us move towards a partnership-based world?
There's sort of two parts to the solution, or to the directions we might head. At an individual level, it has to do with really owning and advocating for the values of creativity. What is it? What are the values we are expressing when we are engaged in creative play or creative work? What does that look like? And those are, as I've said, profoundly relational values. They have to do with our with our sense of interconnection with one another and with the world around us. The other is a more systemic answer, and it really has to do with a shift in how we how we think about time. Time is really is such a central part of this story, because the vision of time that we have inherited from the industrial age, as we talked about before, is this time is scarce and linear and right, it's clock time. And if you picture, when I talk about this in presentations and classes, there's a wonderful video clip from Charlie Chaplin's 1930 whatever movie called Modern Times, which is his critique of productivity culture, in which his character is just like being hit by the pendulum of the clock and falling down over and over and over again, right? And the image of the clock, looming so large in that film as this emblem of how power is exercised through productivity culture. So one of the things I'm really interested in is having us expand our vocabulary of time beyond clock time. Because what creators know about time and what caregivers know about time is very different. Is essentially that time is a kind of container that changes shape and feeling depending on what you're doing with it, right? So the structural part of this is we see workplaces, moving toward things like the 4-day work week, flex time, paid time off that you don't have to pretend to be sick to get, right? Those kinds of workplace shifts that just move us away from being in a perpetual state of exhaustion, such that all we can imagine doing is trying to offer some care to our families and then taking a nap or falling asleep, right? There's not a lot left over of that kind of room for imagination and dreaming and visioning and musing and all of those kinds of things that are part of the creative life. We all need to retrain ourselves from thinking about time and task and focus on a sort of new equation, which is sort of the quality of our presence informs the quality of our interactions with others, which informs the quality of our results. And so I think we see the threads of this in the culture of more emphasis on self-care, more emphasis on the quality of presence. When you're making widgets, it doesn't matter if you're cranky or tired or stressed or impatient. You're there as part of the machine and you're churning something out. But as soon as you're trying to create a result that requires a sort of high quality interaction, it matters how you show up, the energy that you bring, the quality of your spirit. Are you there in joy?
So are there tools that you can speak about or that you've developed to help us all really get in touch with our creative selves?
Yeah, well, on this productivity, creativity ethos side, I've developed some tools that describe each of these ethoses as a set of values and beliefs. And what happens is, and so you can kind of go through and sort of, check the ones that you hold most dear from all three of the columns. And what happens is you begin to realize like, oh, I hold beliefs and values from all three of these ethoses: productivity, creativity, and care. They're all interwoven through all of our lives. So it's about, and once we can sort of see that, I think that tool is really helpful for getting people to say, oh, I already hold these values. I just don't live them because I'm overwhelmed by the demands of productivity. And that's, I think, a good first step. I've also developed a expanded vocabulary of time that pulls from the kind of understandings of time that writers and artists and others creators have, and also the kinds of vocabulary of time that caregivers have. Things like, what is it in caregiving? We think about making. If you have a friend in need, you make time, right? Well, what does that mean in productivity? In clock time, that makes no sense. Time cannot be made. It's just ticking away, right? But so thinking about what we already know about these other ways of being in time and giving more value to those. But I think that, so there's two other tools that I've developed that I've noticed really have been very helpful for my students and coaching clients. And one is I don't say just, but is a cyclical map of creating as a process. And what it helps us to see is that while productivity culture teaches us that progress is this linear, sort of straight up line on the graph that we can all picture, that creativity happens in cycles and spirals. And one of the features of that cyclical map of the creating process that's really helpful for people is that it shows that one of the built-in features of the cycle of creativity, and it is a feature, not a bug, is this space called the void, right? Is this space where something has ended, but the next thing has not yet begun. And creators experience this all the time, right? At the end of a project, you think, oh, I'm empty. I'll never create again. I can't, will I ever write another song? Will I ever write another book? Will I ever paint another painting? And that space of void is such a critical part of the creativity ethos, because in productivity culture, we treat those spaces where nothing seems to be happening and we genuinely don't know where we're going next as horrifying, right? In productivity culture, what do? You get to work faster. You get more restless. You get more busy. You more breathless. You just I got to get through this, as quickly as possible. And what creators know is if you sit with that space and in Tibetan Buddhism there's 32 forms of consciousness that are available to you only in those times, right, that are not available to you in other times, which is fascinating. But you sit in that space of not knowing and trust that it is not the empty void, it is a fertile void. And so that's that piece of that tool. And I just taught that particular lesson yesterday in a class, and it's just so powerful to give people that tool for accepting, naming, honoring that those times. And people are like, oh, well, I've experienced, yeah, we all have, but we don't talk about it, or we talk about it as depression, or we talk about it as lostness, or we have all these ways of sort of invalidating the importance of those times. So that's one tool.
Wonderful. Well, for our listeners, I want to make sure you know that links to Sara's Academy will all be provided in the show notes for today's episode, as well as always, the links to the Center for Partnership Systems, where you can always dive into any of the courses that Sara helped develop. To dig much more deeply into Riane Eisler's cultural transformation theory, her domination partnership, social lens continuum. So, Sara, before we close, I wonder if you have any final words that you would like to share with our listeners.
I think I would just close with a sort of exhortation to listeners to really feel empowered to stand up for the ethos of creativity, for the values, beliefs, and aspirations that have room for joy, that have room for generativity and play, for deep engagement with ourselves and the world. And don't let your idea of what creativity is get shrunken down to the productivity ethos view that creativity is just sort of a snazzy way of making products. It is not. and I think in this age of AI, it's essential. We didn't really go there, but it's so important that we understand the human role of creativity in our humanity. And so stand up for your own inner life, your own inner light, your soul, your way of discovering the world, your way of expressing your spirit. Because this is not, it is essential and life-saving at the level of us as individuals to stand up for ourselves in that way and for the power of our creativity. But it is also, to me, very clear that we are not going to produce our way into a better world. We are going to have to create it. And so having access to our creativity is the only way we're going to collectively really be able, and our caring, of course, which is sort of, to me, baked into creativity too. But, we are going to have to create a better world together. And the values and beliefs and ethoses of task lists and goal achievement are not going to get us there. We need this expanded way of understanding the world and relating to the world. So it's not just about self-care in the narrowest sense. It is about care of our cultural ecology. And I think we should all take that really seriously in a very playful way.
Thank you for listening to the Power of Partnership podcast. We're grateful to Rising Appalachia for the use of resilience as our Power of Partnership theme music. If you would like us to feature your partnership story, or if you would like to be a proud sponsor of the Power of Partnership podcast, please contact us at center@partnershipway.org. We hope you enjoyed this episode and will leave us a review on your favorite podcast channel. And don't forget to subscribe to be notified when new episodes are released every other Tuesday. I'm Cherri Jacobs Pruitt. See you next time on the Power of Partnership podcast.
I am resilient. I trust the movement. I negate the chaos. Uplift the negative. I'll show up at the table again and again and again. I'll close my mouth and learn to live.